Hi, everybody. It's Megan Thompson, and on a Sunday, I don't know if anybody's able to catch me live today, but I had some time while my husband's out with my daughter at her tumbling class for me to get on here today. So I wanted to take advantage of that, and I'm also procrastinating cleaning the house for my in-laws. So, of course, this is a perfect time for me to be on here. But I wanted to speak about, I've been thinking and reflecting on the year and feeling really grateful about the opportunities I've had to serve the families here in this group and in my private practice, and just assessing how blessed I am in my life. And I've been feeling motivated, called to talk about why I do this work on a deeper level than I've said before. So this is a bit of a long lead-in because it's hard for me to speak about. I'm not necessarily one who pours her heart out to people in general. So to do it on social media is a challenge for me. And it's also true that I'm asking you guys to seek out support in this way. So I need to model that. And I wanted to spend some time today talking about why I came to support highly sensitive kids and why this means so much to me, not just on a professional level, but on a personal level. And some of you have gotten the chance to watch some of my other videos about that, but I haven't really talked much about my own personal experience living with a sister who's highly sensitive, and what that was like as I grew up, finally knowing what that meant for our family. And I wanted to talk about it from the standpoint of recognizing how difficult it can be to parent a highly sensitive child. And I've been holding back on some of this because it's my mom's story to tell. And it's also true that it's my story to tell too. So I can't let my mom's hesitation to share that. I mean, she's not on social media as much, obviously, but like her own, my parents' own difficulties hold me back from helping you guys. So, there's some information that I'm not necessarily going to share on Facebook, but people who work with me directly hear more about that. But I wanted to talk about the wake-up call that I had as an adult whose sister is highly sensitive. So it was like a couple years out of grad school, and it was probably 7 years ago that I was home visiting my family before I got married, and I had seen my sister, who was out of college at that point, had finished her personal training certification and was working in gyms. And it was the first time that I had seen her because my family's up in New England, and I was down in Virginia at the time. And it's the first time I'd seen her since Christmas, and it was probably like summertime. And I remember feeling shocked and devastated because she was skin and bones. And nobody really noticed, or maybe they were too close to it. But it was clear to me as a mental health professional that my sister had developed anorexia. And being a personal trainer and the stress that she had with being the perfectionist, which can be really challenging for highly sensitive people, led her to feel like she had to be the best at her job. and with the stress of taking on this new position and working in a new environment and not really feeling like she was in her heart. She works much more effectively outside as a personal trainer, and she was, in a gym, and that just felt really closed off to her, and she felt like it wasn't her true calling. She also works better working with kids, as well as being a transformational trainer for adults, and just the daily grind of being in a gym, like waiting and hoping and wishing for people to come be your client could be overwhelming. So she started to throw herself into her workouts to be the best. And so that meant, consistent running and exercising and wasting away as a result, because she was always focused on eating healthily and was very particular about what she ate. And, this is a story that she tells, her transformation story that she tells in her profession. So I feel okay sharing this. But I want to talk about what that was like for me to come home, 6 months after seeing her and being at the beach. So, I see my sister, who's 2 years younger than me, in a bikini, and I'm like, holy shit, like there's your ribs, there's your spine. And it was scary as hell. And, I think my parents, because they lived closer to her, they didn't really see the progression as much of a shock that I did, because, and for those of you who have worked with people or have dealt with family members who've dealt with an eating disorder or depression or anything of that nature, usually it's a more gradual process than just 6 months later you see your sister's lost 30 pounds. And FaceTime wasn't around at that point. So, we weren't really sharing pictures or anything at that point, seeing each other. So the stress that she was enduring and the challenge that my family faced at that point was trying to find a way to get through to her, to have her get help, and to recognize that it needed to happen now, not later, not any time. And for those of you who are watching, let me know, say hi. Or for those of you who watch it later, hashtag replay on my family story. And I don't really have all of the words laid out to share the story, but the devastation that we felt as family members for my sister was unparalleled to the pain that she was clearly experiencing, and the depression and anxiety that was paralyzing her and leading her to take excessive interest in exercise. And as a therapist, I of course knew she needed to get help, but I also knew that she needed help to find that motivation. And in my true blunt fashion, the only thing that got through to her was literally calling her an anorexic and saying this is not this, you're not okay. You're anorexic. You need help. We're going to find you a therapist. This is happening. You don't get a choice about it. And I threw myself into the research to solve the problem. And, it took her a while to make the appointment. And I wanted to share about how powerless my parents felt at that point. I think they were really struggling with believing what was going on and the reality of that, and the fact that their child could die at any moment, because anorexia is deadly. And since I didn't know how long she had been restricting, I did know that she had started to lose her hair. I knew that it was life or death at this point. And I think that was one of the catalysts for her as well. And it's why I view my bluntness in this group as motivating and not, why I think it's really important to not sugarcoat, because as parents of highly sensitive kids, it can be, and parents of any child, it can be hard to take a step back and realize what's transgressed, like what's happened in the last year or what's happened in the last 2 years and where you're headed. And knowing not only from a professional standpoint, but also from a personal standpoint, the worst case scenario can happen to anybody, happen to my family, is, having that knowledge, I can't not talk about it. And it weighed heavy on me. I went home back to Virginia and I developed insomnia. And, because I couldn't help, like I was stuck in a different state, stuck in this sense of not being able to motivate my sister to make the decision, other than being, being very blunt and at times, mean. Like I was angry at the fact that she wasn't getting help for her anorexia. And so I was mean about it. I was saying like this, you're going to die. That's mean. I mean, I guess you could say that's mean, but it's really blunt. Certainly not something she wanted to hear. And as a highly sensitive person, that could be really, really hurtful to hear. But it's the only way that I knew how to say it. Because I was in my own pain and I could feel my parents' pain and I could feel that stuckness, and I knew that somebody had to do something about it. And, so then I went home to Virginia, and finally, we were able to find her somebody who knew what they were doing and could help her address it. But again, I speak to my parents' powerlessness and the powerlessness I felt as well, and the ripple effect that had on, my brother who was in New York City, and my husband who was my boyfriend at the time, who, I was a monster. Before kids, if I didn't get my 8 hours of sleep before I had my daughter, like I was a monster. And, he's a saint because he proposed to me like a month after the insomnia. The insomnia lasted for about a month for me because I got help pretty quickly. Because I knew that was not something that I could deal with, especially being a therapist. I wouldn't be serving my clients effectively, but, the constant tension and the constant fear and the constant hypervigilance and worry about what would happen and what was going to happen next and whether or not it would work and whether or not, like, in leaving that sense of control over my sister's well-being in somebody else's hands, this therapist who, like, with credentials sort of knew, I hoped knew. But my sister was an adult, so my parents had no control over what they could do. They couldn't call the therapist. They couldn't tell her what was going on. The therapist, based on her ethical boundaries, like, had to tell my sister every time that they called, and then my sister would say, no, I don't want you to talk to them. And then that led to the therapist not having the whole story about what was going on and how depressed my sister was, because it was hard for her to share. And so it delayed her progress. And while she did make progress, she recovered from anorexia. It took longer, in my opinion. I mean, and I'm like a very efficient, a type A person. So long, anything longer than what's absolutely necessary is long for me. But I just, it sits with me, that pain, and the fact that it weighed heavy on my parents' heart, and it affected my parents' ability to help her and hold her accountable, in different ways, because they were fearful that she would slide back into that depression, was paralyzing for the whole family and really difficult for the whole family. And so, before that, I didn't believe that my sister was highly sensitive. I didn't believe that there was something going on. And then, that was the catalyst. I had received the training at this point about sensitivity and the fact that it's biological, and the fact that without, strategic parenting and changing the home environment, it can really lead to really pretty devastating mental health disorders. I knew all that intellectually, but in my heart, I didn't know what that meant until my sister dealt with it, and we dealt with it as a family. And that's what drove me to the specialties that I have now and the way that I work with parents now in both capacities as a therapist and as a parent coach. So I speak about it now, and for those of you who are catching this in the middle, I want to talk more about the pain my mom felt and how, not sharing that would be a disservice to you, and it still weighs heavy on my parents, I'm sure, like the struggle and that pain and the worry that it would go back to the way it was. And my mom's on like high blood pressure medication to prove it. Like, it weighs on her heart. And while they live, awesome lives and they're great humans, they're great parents, and that it hasn't led them to be depressed. It still is a thing. Like, it's still a thing in our lives. And my sister has to work really hard to not slide back into that pattern. And it's challenging. It's a daily challenge. Recovery from anorexia is not something that you can just like think you've got it. You can, because if you get complacent, you can slide back into old patterns. And so, or if you hit like major stressors, you can slide back into old patterns. So you have to keep that sense of recovery as a, knowing that that's like a lifelong process. And if this story motivates just one of you to take action now instead of waiting and seeing how it works for your child, then this is worth it. Then sharing my story, that story. See, I still have like an ability to separate from it. Sharing my story, sharing my family's story, is worth it. It's why I'm here. So I can get passionate and fervent and say the F-bomb and say, the shit's scary. And I wanted you to know why I say those things. Why it's not just because I deal with suicidal teens and I work with, help them in my private practice. Like, this is a personal story for me as well. And when it gets that bad, it takes a long time to get out of it. And the cost to the whole family is really, really hard. And, it affects the whole family in different ways. And I've talked about like how challenging it was, for me to admit to the fact that I viewed my sister as, dramatic or different when we were growing up, but then, the bigger repercussions of that, and the sense of helplessness, I think is another key reason why I dealt with insomnia. Because I wasn't able to make the changes at that point for her, and because it was, the ball's in her court. And I think that's another reason why I speak about why therapy can not be effective for families of parents of highly sensitive kids, because there's that sense of separation. You know, as a therapist, we're trained to say, computer just died, like went to sleep. That the person in front of you is the one who needs to make the change. You know, you as the therapist holds the relationship, and then the onus is on the person in front of you. And yes and no. You know, the families grow up in a whole unit, and for children, I don't believe that that's true. I believe that it comes first from the parents, and that's why I changed the way I work with parents in my private practice, work with kids in my private practice, because when it gets to that point where it becomes the onus on the child to change, I mean, that's happening as an adult, and then the parents still feel powerless. So for those of you just hopping on, I'm wrapping up what I've been talking about, but I encourage you to go back and watch the rest of this, because I hope that it helps you feel like there's another option, like you can do something different for your kids, that the onus lies on you and not your child. And I don't want you to get to the point where it ends up lying on your child because you didn't make that, take that action earlier. And I hope that my story is helpful for you to see that and where I'm coming from. Okay, so that's it for Sunday. I think I've procrastinated cleaning my house for my in-laws enough. And if you are ready to reach out, then do so, because it doesn't have to be like this for your family. All right. Thank you. Bye.